From the iconic vehicle that was deemed cheating by the Academy to the futuristic bikes that accidentally inspired Pixar, Tron's light cycles have a bizarre production story that most fans have never heard. These glowing motorcycles weren't just groundbreaking, they were controversial, technically impossible, and created with methods so labor-intensive they were never attempted again. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Tron's light cycle. Fact 1. The iconic canopy was a technical accident. When Sid Mead first sat down to design the light cycles for Tron, he envisioned something sleek and futuristic with the riders fully exposed, much like a traditional motorcycle, but with a glowing high-tech aesthetic. His original sketches showed the characters sitting upright on open bikes, their bodies visible as they raced through the digital landscape. It was a clean, minimalist design that looked incredible on paper. But when the production team tried to bring it to life using the computer technology available in the early 1980s, they ran into a massive problem. The computers simply couldn't render human bodies convincingly enough to blend with the computer-generated imagery of the light cycles and the game grid environment. The technology was so primitive that trying to animate realistic human forms alongside the CGI elements created jarring visual inconsistencies that would have ruined the entire scene. Faced with this limitation, the team had to make a quick decision. Rather than abandoning the light cycle concept entirely or drastically simplifying it, they came up with a creative workaround that would actually become one of the most iconic elements of the film. They added the enclosed canopy that wraps around the rider, essentially hiding the human body inside a glowing shell. This wasn't part of Mead's artistic vision, and it wasn't a deliberate stylistic choice to make the vehicles look more futuristic. It was purely a technical necessity born from the limitations of 1980s computer animation. What's remarkable is that this accident of technology created a design that became instantly recognizable and has remained a defining feature of Tron's visual identity for over 4 decades. Fact 2. The Academy called it cheating. Tron was one of the most visually groundbreaking films of 1982, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with special effects and computer animation. The film's stunning visuals, particularly the light cycle sequences, represented a massive leap forward for cinema and seemed like an obvious contender for recognition during award season. However, when it came time for the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to consider Tron for the Best Visual Effects category at the 1983 Oscars, something shocking happened. The film was disqualified from consideration, and the reason given was absolutely baffling. Academy members felt that using computers to create special effects was somehow cheating, and that it gave the filmmakers an unfair advantage over productions that relied on traditional practical effects and handcrafted miniatures. This decision was particularly absurd when you consider that only about 15 minutes of Tron's 96-minute runtime actually featured computer-generated imagery. The vast majority of the film's effects were created using traditional animation techniques, backlit animation, rotoscoping, and other conventional methods that had been used in filmmaking for decades. The small amount of CGI that was included required an enormous amount of manual work, technical expertise, and problem-solving that was arguably more difficult and time-consuming than traditional effects work. The irony of this decision wasn't lost on the visual effects community, and it remains one of the most controversial and short-sighted rulings in Oscar history. Within just a few years, computer-generated imagery would become standard practice in Hollywood, and the Academy would have no choice but to embrace it. Fact 3. Animated, using 75,000 handmade cells, creating the light cycle sequences in Tron required a production process so labor-intensive and painstaking that it has never been attempted again in the history of cinema. The visual effects team had to produce 75,000 individual frames of special animation cells called codoliths to bring these sequences to life. Each of these codoliths was a handcrafted piece that contained every single detail needed for that particular frame, including the characters, the light cycles themselves, the game grid environment, the glowing light trails, and every element of motion and action. The process was extraordinarily complex because, unlike traditional animation where backgrounds could be reused and characters drawn on separate layers, the codolith method required everything to be integrated into each individual frame. Teams of artists worked for months on end, carefully creating each cell with precise attention to detail and ensuring that the motion from one frame to the next would be smooth enough to create the illusion of movement when played at 24 frames per second. The sheer volume of work was staggering, with different teams assigned to different elements of each frame, and everything had to be coordinated perfectly to maintain consistency across thousands of individual images. Once all the codoliths were completed, they had to be photographed and processed, using special backlit photography techniques to create the glowing neon effect that became Tron's signature visual style. The entire process took so long and required so much manual labor that it contributed significantly to the film's extended production schedule and budget overruns. But the end result was unlike anything audiences had ever seen before. Fact 4. The computer had less memory than your phone. When we think about the groundbreaking computer graphics in Tron today, it's easy to assume that the production had access to powerful, state-of-the-art computing technology that allowed them to create those stunning visuals. The reality was shockingly different. The most advanced computer system used for Tron's special effects had only 2 megabytes of memory and 330 megabytes of storage space. To put that in perspective, the smartphone sitting in your pocket right now has thousands of times more processing power and storage capacity than the cutting-edge machines that created one of cinema's most iconic visual effects sequences. A typical modern smartphone has at least 4 to 8 gigabytes of memory, which is 2,000 to 4,000 times more than what the Tron team had to work with, and storage space measured in hundreds of gigabytes or even terabytes. With such limited resources, every single computation had to be carefully planned and optimized. The visual effects teams couldn't just render a scene and see what it looked like, because the computers were so slow that a single frame could take hours to process. They had to calculate everything in advance, input their data with extreme precision, and then wait patiently to see if their work had been successful. There was no room for trial and error, no ability to quickly iterate on designs, and no option to simply increase the computing power when things got complicated. The fact that the filmmakers were able to create such visually stunning and technically complex sequences with such primitive technology is a testament to the incredible skill, creativity, and determination of everyone involved in the production. Fact 5. Good and evil colors were swapped mid-production. One of the most distinctive visual elements of Tron is the color coding system that helps audiences distinguish between the heroic programs and the villainous ones controlled by the Master Control Program. Throughout most of the film, the good characters have blue circuits, while the evil characters have red or orange circuits, creating a clear visual language that's easy to follow. However, this wasn't always the plan, and the production went through a significant change partway through filming that created some continuity issues that sharp-eyed viewers can still spot today. Originally, the filmmakers decided that good programs would be identified by yellow circuits, while evil programs would have blue circuits. This color scheme was used during the early stages of production, with costumes designed, scenes filmed, and animation completed based on this original concept. Then, somewhere in the middle of the production process, someone realized that this color assignment didn't feel quite right. The decision was made to reverse the color scheme entirely, with blue becoming the color of the heroes and yellow or red being associated with the villains. This reversal meant that a significant amount of work had to be redone, but not everything could be changed due to time and budget constraints. As a result, there are several inconsistencies scattered throughout the finished film. The most noticeable example is Clue, the program created by Flynn to help him gather evidence against Dillinger. Clue is definitely one of the good guys, working for the heroes and trying to help Flynn, but if you look carefully at his circuits, they're yellow instead of blue, a remnant of the original color scheme that never got corrected before the film was released. Fact 6. Jeff Bridges couldn't stop playing arcade games. Director Steven Lisberger wanted the cast of Tron to truly understand the world of video games and arcade culture that formed the foundation of the film's story. So he came up with a creative solution to immerse them in that environment. He lined the walls of the soundstage with working arcade machines, all set to free play, giving the actors unlimited access to games like Pac-Man, Asteroids, Space Invaders, and dozens of others. The idea was that during breaks between scenes, the cast could experience the addictive nature of these games firsthand and bring that understanding to their performances. What Liesberger didn't anticipate was just how well this plan would work, particularly with his lead actor. Jeff Bridges, who played Kevin Flynn, became absolutely obsessed with the arcade game Battlezone, a first-person tank combat game that was one of the most advanced arcade experiences available at the time. Bridges would play the game between takes, during the lunch breaks, and any other moment when he wasn't actively needed on set. His obsession reached the point where it actually started to interfere with the production schedule. Crew members would finish setting up a shot and call for Bridges, only to find him deeply engrossed in Battlezone, completely tuned out to everything happening around him. The game's vector graphics and first-person perspective had completely captivated him, and he was determined to beat his high score. Eventually, the situation became so disruptive that crew members had to physically remove Bridges from the arcade machine and escort him to the set to film his scenes, a task that became a recurring challenge throughout the production. Fact 7. Disney animators refused to work on it. When Disney greenlit Tron for production, the studio leadership assumed that their in-house animation department would be excited about the opportunity to work on such a groundbreaking and technically innovative project. After all, Disney had built its entire reputation on pushing the boundaries of animation technology and creating visual experiences that had never been seen before. However, when the project was presented to the veteran Disney animators, many of them had a reaction that shocked the executives. They were afraid of the project, and more specifically, they were terrified of the computers. These traditional animators, who had spent decades mastering the craft of hand-drawn animation, saw the computer technology being introduced in Tron as an existential threat to their careers and livelihoods. They believed, quite reasonably, that if computers could be used to create animation, then studios would eventually replace human animators with machines, making their skills obsolete. This fear was so widespread and deeply felt that many Disney animators openly refused to work on Tron, essentially boycotting the production. The studio had no choice but to outsource most of the animation work to outside companies and contractors who were more willing to experiment with the new technology. Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, it's clear that the animators' fears were not entirely unfounded. While traditional hand-drawn animation continued for many years after Tron, the rise of computer-generated imagery did fundamentally transform the animation industry. 22 years after Tron's release, Disney closed its traditional animation department and the studio fully transitioned to computer animation, exactly as those 1980s animators had feared. Fact 8. Pac-Man makes a cameo. During the Escape, Tron is filled with references to early 1980s video game culture, but one of the most delightful Easter eggs is hidden in a scene that most viewers miss on their first viewing. During the sequence where Tron and Ram successfully escape from the deadly light cycle arena, the action cuts briefly to Sark's control room, where the villain is monitoring the situation and coordinating the response to the escaped programs. If you watch this scene carefully and pay close attention to the background details, you can spot something unexpected on one of the control screens behind Sark. There, displayed clearly on a monitor, is Pac-Man, the iconic yellow character from one of the most popular arcade games of all time. The cameo isn't just a visual reference either. If you listen carefully to the audio track during this moment, you can actually hear Pac-Man's distinctive Waka Waka sound effects playing faintly in the background, the same sounds that accompanied the character as he chomped his way through dots and avoided ghosts in the arcade game. This appearance makes perfect sense within the context of the film's story. Tron takes place inside a computer system, and that system contains various programs and games, so it's entirely logical that Pac-Man would exist somewhere in that digital world. The inclusion of such a recognizable and beloved character was a fun nod to the video game culture that inspired the film, and it helped ground Tron's fantastical computer world in the real arcade experiences that audiences were familiar with. Fact 9. The light cycle sequence. Inspired Pixar. The impact of Tron's light cycle sequences extended far beyond the film itself and actually changed the entire trajectory of modern animation. John Lasseter, who was working as an animator at Disney in the early 1980s, was invited to a special screening of Tron before its theatrical release. Like many of his colleagues, Lasseter had been trained in traditional hand-drawn animation and had built his career on those techniques. When he watched the light cycle sequences for the first time, seeing those glowing motorcycles racing through the digital game grid with their trails of light stretching behind them, he was completely blown away by what he was witnessing. The combination of computer-generated imagery and traditional animation techniques created something that felt entirely new and opened up possibilities that Lasseter had never considered before. In numerous interviews over the years, Lasseter has credited Tron, and specifically those light cycle sequences, as the moment that changed his entire career path. He became obsessed with the potential of computer animation and began exploring how this technology could be used not just for special effects, but as a medium for creating entire films. This passion eventually led him to leave Disney and join a small computer graphics division at Lucasfilm, which would later become an independent company called Pixar. Lasseter became one of Pixar's co-founders and directed Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated feature film, which revolutionized the animation industry. He has stated explicitly that without Tron and those mesmerizing light cycle sequences, he never would have pursued computer animation, and Toy Story might never have existed. The entire modern era of animated filmmaking can trace its lineage back to that moment when Lasseter watched those glowing motorcycles race across the screen. Fact 10. Supertramp abandoned the soundtrack. The music of Tron is an essential part of what makes the film so memorable, with Wendy Carlos's electronic score creating the perfect sonic companion to the film's digital visuals. However, the production team initially envisioned a very different musical approach that would have included prominent rock songs to complement the orchestral and electronic score. The British rock band Supertramp, who were at the height of their popularity in the early 1980s following massive hits like The Logical Song and Breakfast in America, were originally hired to contribute songs to Tron's soundtrack. The band seemed like a perfect fit for the project, with their blend of progressive rock and synthesizer-driven pop that could have meshed well with the film's futuristic aesthetic. Supertramp began working on material for the film, but as the production progressed, creative differences emerged between the band and the filmmakers regarding the style and direction of the music. Eventually, these disagreements became irreconcilable, and Supertramp made the decision to pull out of the project entirely, leaving the production team scrambling to find a replacement. They turned to Journey, another hugely popular rock band of the era, who agreed to step in and record 2 songs for the film. Journey contributed 1990's theme, which plays during an early montage sequence, and Only Solutions, which was used for the end credits. While Journey's contributions are memorable and fit the film well, it's fascinating to imagine what Tron's soundtrack might have sounded like if Supertramp had remained involved and completed their original vision for the project. Fact 11. The 90-degree turns were a limitation. One of the most distinctive features of the light cycle sequences in Tron is the way the vehicles move, making only sharp 90-degree turns as they race through the game grid, creating perpendicular trails of light behind them. This geometric movement pattern has become so iconic and so associated with the light cycle concept that many people assume it was always intended as an artistic choice, a deliberate design decision meant to emphasize the digital, game-like nature of the vehicles and their environment. The reality is quite different. The light cycles turn at perfect right angles, not because the filmmakers thought it looked cool or because it fit some deeper conceptual vision, but because the primitive animation technology available in 1982 simply couldn't handle anything more complex. The computers and software being used to create the computer-generated portions of the light cycle sequences had enormous difficulty rendering curved motion convincingly. Creating smooth, realistic curves would have required far more processing power than the production had access to, along with more sophisticated algorithms and programming techniques that hadn't been developed yet. Every curve would need to be calculated as a series of tiny incremental changes in direction across multiple frames, and getting that to look smooth and natural was beyond the capabilities of the technology. Making the light cycles turn in straight lines and right angles was a solution born from pure necessity, a workaround that allowed the visual effects teams to create dynamic racing sequences without pushing the computers past their breaking point. What's remarkable is how well this limitation worked in the context of the film. The angular movements actually enhanced the sense that these vehicles existed in a digital world governed by different rules than physical reality. Fact 12. It required manual coordinate entry per frame. Modern audiences are accustomed to seeing incredibly complex computer-generated imagery in films, with entire worlds and characters created inside computers using sophisticated software that can generate motion, lighting, and realistic physics automatically. When we watch something like a Marvel movie or a Pixar film, we understand that computers are doing most of the heavy lifting in terms of creating and animating the digital elements. However, the computers available during Tron's production in the early 1980s couldn't do any of that automatically. The technology was so primitive that animators had to manually enter numerical coordinates for every single object in every single frame of animation. They couldn't just tell the computer to move a light cycle from point A to point B and have the machine calculate the in-between positions. Instead, they had to figure out the exact position of every element for each individual frame and type those numbers into the computer by hand. The amount of data required was staggering. To create just 4 seconds of light cycle footage, the animators needed to input approximately 600 individual coordinates, carefully calculating each one to ensure that the motion would appear smooth when all the frames were played in sequence. Every tiny movement, every shift in position, every element of the scene required manual calculation and data entry. The process was incredibly slow, tedious, and prone to errors because a single mistake in any of those hundreds of coordinates could ruin an entire sequence. This meant that creating even a few minutes of computer-generated footage required months of painstaking work from teams of highly skilled technical artists and programmers who had to combine their understanding of animation principles with precise mathematical calculations. Fact 13. Tron: Legacy finally used Meade's original design. When Tron: Legacy went into production in the late 2000s, the creative team faced an interesting challenge regarding the design of the light cycles that would appear in this long-awaited sequel. They needed to create vehicles that felt like a natural evolution from the original 1982 film while also taking advantage of nearly 3 decades of advances in both filmmaking technology and vehicle design aesthetics. The task of reimagining the light cycles fell to Daniel Simon, an automotive designer who had previously worked on concept vehicles for major car manufacturers. As Simon researched the original film and studied Sid Meade's work from the first production, he made a fascinating discovery. Meade's very first light cycle designs, the ones he had created before the technical limitations of 1980s computer animation forced the addition of the enclosed canopy, featured open cockpits with exposed riders. These original concepts had been rejected not because they looked bad, but simply because they were impossible to create with the technology available at the time. Simon realized that these vintage rejected designs were actually perfect for Tron: Legacy. The advanced computer graphics technology available in 2010 could finally render human figures convincingly alongside CGI vehicles and environments, making Meade's original vision technically feasible for the first time. Simon used those original Sid Meade concepts as the foundation for his light cycle designs in Tron: Legacy, finally bringing to life the sleek, open cockpit motorcycles that Meade had imagined nearly 3 decades earlier. It was a perfect example of how technological limitations that once seemed permanent can eventually be overcome, allowing artists to realize visions that were once considered impossible. Fact 14. One prop light cycle survived production. Unlike the original Tron, which existed primarily as computer graphics and animation with no physical light cycles ever constructed, Tron: Legacy embraced practical effects and prop making as part of its production strategy. The team built 5 full-scale functioning light cycles that could actually be ridden by stunt performers and actors, creating a much more tangible connection between the performers and the iconic vehicles. These weren't just static props designed to sit in the background of shots. They were engineered as real motorcycles with working wheels, suspension systems, and the ability to support a rider's weight while moving at reasonable speeds on specially designed sets. The construction of these vehicles required significant investment in terms of both time and money, with skilled fabricators and motorcycle builders working together to create machines that looked futuristic and otherworldly, while still functioning as actual vehicles that could be safely operated on a film set. However, once Tron Legacy completed its theatrical run and the promotional tour ended, Disney made the decision to destroy 4 of the 5 light cycles that had been built for the production. The reasoning behind this destruction is unclear, but it likely involved concerns about liability, storage costs, or simply a corporate policy of disposing of props after a film's release. Fortunately, 1 light cycle survived this purge. The final remaining prop was sold to a private collector in China who reportedly paid a substantial sum for the privilege of owning this unique piece of cinema history. According to reports from the sale, the collector was specifically informed that the light cycle, despite being a functioning motorcycle, was not street legal and could not be legally operated on public roads. Fact 15. A screening crashed. Disney's stock price. Disney had enormous confidence in Tron during its production, believing that the film's groundbreaking visual effects and unique storyline would make it a massive commercial success. As part of their marketing strategy to build excitement and positive buzz around the film before its theatrical release, the studio organized a special advance screening specifically for stock market analysts and financial industry professionals who followed Disney's business performance. The thinking behind this decision made sense from a corporate perspective. If these influential financial experts saw Tron and came away impressed by its innovation and commercial potential, they would presumably issue positive reports about Disney's prospects, potentially driving up the company's stock price and generating additional excitement among investors. The studio executives apparently believed so strongly in the film that they felt comfortable showing it to this critical audience before the general public had a chance to see it. Unfortunately, the screening did not go as planned. The analysts and financial professionals who attended came away with mixed reactions to the film. While some appreciated its technical achievements, others found the story confusing, questioned whether general audiences would embrace such an unusual concept, and expressed concerns about whether the film would be able to recoup its substantial production budget. These lukewarm reactions quickly translated into cautious or negative reports about Disney's short-term financial outlook. The impact was immediate and measurable. The following day, when the stock market opened for trading, Disney's stock price dropped by $2.50 per share, a significant decline that represented a loss of substantial value for the company and its shareholders, all because of one poorly received advance screening.